And two of the conditions that have to be there for you to meet clinical depression is a depressed mood and a lack of enjoying things that you normally enjoy. So if those two things are present, you can really start to build a case that you have clinical depression from there. There's other symptoms too, like your sleep disturbance, diet, and mood agitation and things like that. But those were things that were starting to gradually happen to me. My sleep was starting to get impacted. I didn't know what the cause of the feeling was. I was attributing it to some sort of spiritual discipline from God. I started to attribute it to maybe it's some losses that I've had in the past, like a past girlfriend or something. I just kind of honestly felt like I was grasping for straws because there was nothing significant that had really happened that would have made me thought that that sent me into a depression. And to be honest, I couldn't cry during depression. So one of the symptoms for depression is you can either be crying excessively or not crying at all. And I wasn't crying at all. I was praying and reading scripture. I was singing worship songs even when I didn't feel like singing them, and it wasn't changing much. And I had Christians telling me, you know, I had one girl that I really, really liked and was potentially going to date. She told me to just suck it up, and essentially be a man. I had another Christian brother tell me, man, I can't believe you're still going through that. Like it's something I wanted to go through, like it's something I wanted to have upon me. You know, um, I had another brother in faith who's still a good friend of mine today tell me that the reason I was going through what I was going through was because it's what Jesus talked about in the Gospels about the great falling away. He was essentially saying I was a Christian that had fallen away from the faith and I was never turning back. Um, my sister at one point said, and so I do quarterly barbershop talks with mostly Black men over at my barbershop. And one of the questions I like to ask them at the beginning of each talk is, what does depression feel like? If you've ever had depression, what does it feel like? I brought the barbershop up because some men I used that as an example in the barbershop. But one guy was like, well, depression for me is like winning the lottery and not being happy about it. I'll go pick up my ticket, I'll get my money, but I'll be severely depressed and in a dark mood. He's like, that's what depression is like for me. So those are just examples. I mean, there's much, much more to the story. There's so many things that I'm not sharing, not just because I don't want to, but just for time's sake. But I hope that, kind of gave the listeners somewhat of a glimpse of what I went through. And I'll tell you this too, as a man, because I really love to try to help men out there, especially because there is a statistic I have here where women who have depression. Women will attempt suicide, but men are more likely to succeed. And so not that I don't reach out to women because I work with women too and I love them too, but I, I think the men are the most likely to actually kill themselves and the most likely to not get help. And so the one thing I want to finish with is like, as a man, I had several things going through my head that was stopping me from getting the help that I needed eventually, which was by going to the psychiatrist. These thoughts were, if you get help, you're not a man. If you get help, you're weak. If you get help, that means you don't trust God. If you get help, people are going to think you're crazy. So I just say that to any of the listeners out there who are a man or even a woman who might have some of the similar thoughts is it's okay to get help. Like the depression is going to be very negative within your mind and within your heart, and it's going to be preventing you from doing that. But you have to take the step to get the help that you need.
Your story resonates so close to home for me because, again, my oldest brother was my protector. Growing up, there's 6 years difference between our ages, and being the little brother, he always had my back. I was actually a water boy for his high school football team when I was in sixth or seventh grade when they won the state championship. And we had so many iconic moments growing up, but he was always the one that I laughed with. He was always the one that played sports with me. And when he had his depression right around the same time that you did, it rocked me so hard because there was nothing as the little brother I could do to make him laugh. It was very sad sitting with him and just seeing emptiness in his eyes, and couldn't tell the joke, couldn't do anything to get him out of it, let alone he was going through a dating phase and getting engaged to my now sister-in-law and getting married. And he had bouts where, he would have several months of deep clinical depression, followed up by a short window of look like a recovery. And you build your hopes up to only have him crash back down to this mental state of was a shell of himself, to the point that, this was 2004, 2005, 2006. He actually went to Brockport for a short period of time. But I remember that he used to just disappear. And my sister-in-law would call and say, I don't know where Dave is. And we would, cell phones, there wasn't Facebook back then. You couldn't post, hey, has anybody seen my brother? It was just hoping and praying. And my middle brother, Jared, and I would drive around in the car and park and just run, through, we lived near a university, Binghamton University, and there was a nature preserve, which was just miles of woods. And, because he wasn't driving, we would know he was gone because literally his shoes would be at my parents' house and he was nowhere to be found. And so he was barefoot. And I remember being terrified, running and screaming his name and wondering where he was. And I remember one day we got a call as he was out, and somebody said, hey, dude, your brother is on the west side of Johnson City walking around right now with no shoes on. And for context, I mean, that was miles away from where I grew up. And he had just been walking for hours. And I remember seeing him and feeling so elated. And the reason I get emotional is you talked about suicide. I thank God that my brother never took his life. And if you've never struggled with depression or known somebody that has, to see somebody that you love be a shell of himself. I always told Dave, do not kill yourself, please. And when you're in such a state like that, it is so hard to break through to somebody when you feel helpless. But even in your story, why I want to bring this to the surface is you felt helpless. It's not that you chose to feel this way. And I think sometimes, even now, I mean, you went through this in 2006 and 2024 with social media, with self-help podcasts, with videos, with TikTokers, with content creators. There's never been more information saturating our lives about how to be the most fit, how to be the best dad, how to be the best spouse, how to win at life, how to make all this money on Amazon. And you can feel so empty and suffer in silence because you're inundated with it. And I could not imagine if my brother went through what he went through today with the access that we have through technology. But I think what's so hard is if you've never gone through it, you have no context for what it's like, either personally or as a family member. And as I said, we had well-meaning people that tried to give my brother books to try to convince him that it was just about having a grateful and thankful heart. We had people that had asked him, what did you do? What a crippling question to ask somebody. If you've asked that before, hey, there's grace. There's grace because you've never been through it. And I know on the surface, it can seem like maybe if you just counted your blessings, maybe if you were just thankful, this thing would shake itself off. But that's not how it works when it's a chemical imbalance. And that's always the way that I position it for people that don't understand.